All right, good morning. Thank you for being with us again. And we're here at Turning Leaf Realty Group this morning, and we're talking with Stephen White, who is the Director of Environmental Engineering for Greenway Engineering in Winchester, Virginia. And we just want to thank you for coming this morning. And
absolutely. Thank you for having me, Brian.
All right, tell me, how did you get interested in soil science?
Okay, so in high school, I loved chemistry. I was drawn to it, but I didn't want to be in a lab. And so my high school chemistry teacher actually put me in touch with a local soil scientist, Bob Holmes, who's he's retired now, but he got me interested in it. Talked with him over the phone, went down to what used to be Lower Fairfax, got the basic soil science textbook, and just fell in love with it. And then I went down to Virginia Tech and studied soil science down there, and it's just been something that I'm very passionate about.
You know, whenever I deal with soil science, septic systems and all, one of the things you guys are all refer to is an AOSE, and that's what your license says on it. Yes. What does that stand for?
So the OSE part is on-site soil evaluator, and it's where you either have an A before it or a C before it. The A stands for alternative, which means we have the ability to evaluate drain fields for both conventional and alternative. The C would just be conventional only. So the A is the more advanced of the two licenses that we have. And we are licensed through DPort, so we still have the same continuing education credits. We have to renew that license every 2 years. So we have a high standard in order to get that particular license. The current requirements would be to have at least a 4-year degree in soil science and then 4 years of experience, or 10 years of experience if you don't have a college degree in soils.
Okay. One of the things, I guess, one of the major things that you guys do, obviously, is wastewater systems for homes. Tell me, what is it that your average homeowner who may or may not have much experience with septic systems, particularly private septic systems for homes, what should they know when they're looking at purchasing a home or a site to build on or whatever?
The big key is understanding what a septic system is. And I think a lot of the homeowners are not aware of that, or they purchase a home that has a septic system and they call the county wanting to know where their sewer bill is, because they're used to being on public sewer. And so the components of a septic system are really twofold. You have your collection system, where all of the solids, liquids come out of the house, all the nasty stuff comes out of the house and goes to a large holding tank. That's your septic tank. And then from there, we have to get rid of the wastewater. That goes to your drain field, to the disposal area. So those are the two main components to make sure that folks understand. Now, the septic tank itself, because it has all the solids and liquid in it, that's what has to get pumped out every 3 to 5 years. And if you don't pump those tanks out, the solids build up and then they will migrate to your drain field, which is what you don't want. That's when you have issues. So the big key to understanding for a homeowner is preventative maintenance. Getting the septic tank pumped every 3 to 5 years is so crucial, because it keeps that system in there happy, and it keeps the solids from building up and migrating to the drain field. And that would be the number one key, is preventative maintenance. And secondly, if you have an alternative system, which most new systems are, you are required by the state to have an annual inspection. And that's important because a lot of these systems have filters, pumps, things that need to be checked on a regular basis. And if it's neglected, it could easily malfunction. And nobody wants sewage in their basement or backing up in their yard. So it's necessary to hire someone who is a licensed operator that can assist you in maintaining your system.
Assuming one fails to maintain it properly, what could be the cost involved in a system malfunction?
If it's basic repair versus full replacement, your basic repair may be as expensive as $4,000 or $5,000. A new replacement, and if it's an alternative system, maybe upwards of $30,000. So it's very important for preventative maintenance. And in all honesty, if I'm purchasing a house with a septic system, I want to get that system inspected as thoroughly as possible so I know what I'm purchasing. Mm-hmm. If I buy a house and we decide to waive the septic inspection, I need to be prepared if I might have to replace this thing if it's no good, if it's completely deteriorated, especially if the house is 20 plus years old. It's highly recommended to get it inspected before purchasing. Even if it's a newer home or a newer septic, it's always good to spend a little bit of money to get that inspected thoroughly to make sure what you're purchasing is actually going to work good for what you need.
What's the life expectancy of a typical septic system?
So if it's maintained properly, these systems can last, 40, 50, 60 years. We see systems that have been installed in the 1950s that have had good maintenance. They've had regular pump outs. They've had, if it has a filter, the filter clean, and they're still working good today. But there's many factors in the life expectancy of a system. Is the maintenance been done on it? Is there a lot of chemicals that are being put down the drains? Over with COVID, we had a lot of people use heavy detergents and cleaners such as bleach to clean their house, and they would put that down the sink and down the commode. And that in and of itself could be very detrimental to a septic tank, because inside the septic tank, there are microbes and little critters that break down the solids. And when you introduce a nasty chemical to them, it would kill them, and then that would interfere with the functionality of a septic tank. So that's something that we've seen the last few years, is tanks needing to be replaced and pumped more frequently because of some of these chemicals that previously we didn't clean as thoroughly as we tend to do now.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of chemicals, I can go to almost any hardware store and I can see products on the shelf in certain areas, like, brand names like Red X and things like that, which are branded as aids to your septic system. They're supposed to help with the, with the microbes or whatever inside there to help break down. Are those really needed typically in a system? Are they helpful or are they harmful?
I wouldn't say they're helpful or harmful. Now, they can be helpful if the internal components of the septic tank is not working properly. Like if you've dumped a bunch of bleach down there and you've wiped out all the microbes, a product like Red X or they used to put yeast down the tank, and that would help build up that microbe population to help break down the solids. So that might be a benefit. Generally, if you're putting normal waste down your system, a product like Red X or something like that is not necessarily needed, but it can be beneficial if there's a decline in that kind of microbe population, if you will.
So perhaps on a periodic basis, if there's an issue.
Sure, absolutely. Okay. Yeah. But the key is, if you pump it every 3 to 5 years, your septic pump out company should be able to tell you if things are looking good or if there's something going on. If you're putting a bunch of grease down the septic tank, that's not recommended. Backflow from a water softener is not recommended to go into a septic tank. Things like that can also interfere with the functionality and the life expectancy of a septic system.
Yeah, I've also heard recently that the popularity of flushable wipes and things like that are really not recommended due to the fact that they don't break down like traditional papers.
You can flush anything down the toilet. It's not recommended because they don't break down in the septic tank. And there's certain brands of toilet paper that, it's funny, a septic pump out company will say, I know exactly what brand of toilet paper you use because it's not breaking down at all. And so there's certain brands that you should use and you shouldn't use. And of course, there's all sorts of research you can find on the internet about that kind of stuff. But really, you shouldn't put any wires or anything that claims to be flushable down the toilet. It's easy enough to put that in a trash can.
So unnecessary solid.
Yeah.
You've got a client right now you're ready to purchase a house. It's got a septic system on it, and they've requested a septic inspection on it. What should that client expect to be involved in the inspection? What components should the inspector be looking at? And how do they interpret the results that they're told?
Sure. The first thing that's important is to reach out to the local health department to get a copy of all available records for that septic system. That's going to tell us if it had a valid permit, if there's been any past repairs or past malfunctions of that system. It's going to let us know the type of system, whether it's conventional or alternative. Does it just have one septic tank? Does it have multiple tanks? If it's an alternative system, what type of alternative is it? And there's multiple different types of alternative systems that help treat the wastewater. So that's always step one. We will review that information to determine the level of inspection that's needed. And so during the septic inspection, at a minimum, the septic tank should be uncovered to determine if it needs to be pumped. If it's an alternative system, the components of the alternative system, whether it has an aeration blower on it or whether it has filters, they need to be checked as well. If it's a trench type of system that has a distribution box, that distribution box should be uncovered for inspection also to make sure it's level and that it's working properly. If it's a pump, there's ways to check the electrical components of the pump to make sure that it's working efficiently. And the end result should be, what we produce is a thorough report with photos. And it's good to document what's inspected. So at a minimum, what you should receive from your inspection company should be a very thorough written report, a description of what type of system it is, the number of bedrooms that it's designed to handle, the permitted number of bedrooms, and then a summary of the components, what was inspected, and if there was any deficiencies found. And then if there's deficiencies found, generally some photos are taken just to kind of help document and prove that what might be the issue is actually, it is an issue. Not to say there's any untruthful inspectors out there, but it's always good to back up what you say. If you say that the distribution box need to be replaced, just take a photo of that and prove that, because that could be $3,000 repair right there.
Always trust and verify.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, what's the most common component that fails in it? Say you had the normal conventional system. Is there? Well, I guess you just leave it at that. Is there a common point of failure with these systems that could be looked at more often than others? And
I would say for a standard conventional system, the distribution box is crucial. The purpose of the distribution box is to equally distribute the water to each of the drain field lines. And over time in that box, and it's roughly about a 2 foot by 2 foot concrete box, or it could be a plastic box. We're starting in the early 2000s, the plastic boxes were approved. But if that box gets unlevel or starts to corrode, you can easily get more wastewater to a certain area of your drain field than others. So a lot of times, if for example, if you have 4 drain field lines, if that distribution box starts to get unlevel, it may give all the water to 2 of those lines, whereas the other 2 aren't getting any water. And so you might see some green areas in your yard that the grass is growing a little bit quicker, and then the other 2 lines maybe around the grass because they're not getting any water. But the distribution box, I would say, is probably the most common component that either corrodes faster or gets unlevel, or it may have been driven over by a vehicle, somebody didn't know where it was, and that could easily crack and cause issues with that. So I would say that's the number one issue with conventional systems would be the distribution box.
Actually, my first house, the distribution box is exactly what you described. Over the first couple of years, it had settled, it became a little bit uneven,
right.
And then we actually had water coming up on the surface on the lower end of the drain area, which, of course, as a homeowner, terrified me because I know how expensive those systems should be. Fortunately, I contacted a certified installer and had him come out and look. He said, well, first, don't panic. Second, let's check the D-box. And it was just it had tilted. He was able to readjust it, recovered it back up. The water went away. Yeah. Everything was working normally again. And of course, he inspected other components as well. But fortunately, that was a simple repair.
Right, absolutely.
And fortunately, an honest workman, if he was, wanted to give me some honest advice. And unlike my recent house, which has a 70-year-old septic system in it, which had completely failed and needed to be replaced.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of houses out there with septics that were put in. Really the health department didn't start issuing permits till the 1950s. So any older home prior to that, a lot of times these septic systems are homemade concrete tanks, distribution box, whatever they could build at that time to get the wastewater out of the house. Yeah. And so we see a lot of homes that are being sold now where there's no records at the health department. How do we handle that situation? And those are always challenging situations because you've got a seller that wants to sell the house, and you have a buyer that's excited to purchase this, but nobody wants to deal with the septic issue. And so if there's no records at the health department, the big thing is going and just seeing what's in there. What size of the septic tank? Is it a homemade tank? That would indicate the system was probably put in pre-1950s. Is there one drain field line? Does it just go to a gravel ditch? Does it go to a pile of rock? So there's a lot of ways that if there's no health department records that we can investigate to determine if the septic system is adequate. And the house that you just referred to that's 70 years old, it was a homemade tank. It was basically cinder blocks that went to 2 or 3 lines. So whoever put it in at that time probably just installed it the best they could with what information they had then. And so someone purchasing that house now, of course, in your example, we put in a brand new system, but if a buyer is interested in something like that, they need to be aware of what they're getting into with an older system such as that.
If you had somebody who was looking to build a new house, so they're going to go out and they look at property, they find the most beautiful piece of land, they fall in love with it. How can they tell whether or not they can put a septic system into this lot? How big a capacity system can it be? Because, you know, if they're going to put a small house, that's one thing. If they want to put a large multi-bedroom house on, that's another situation. And I'm going to tell where it's going to go.
Sure.
Because, of course, you're going to have a lovely house site, but how are you going to know if they can serve that specific site with it? Absolutely.
So it's funny because I just came from a property that someone had purchased last year that we could not get a drain field site on it. So the number one assumption is that I want to buy a piece of property and I can build on it. And that's not always true. Just because a property like the one I looked at this morning was created in the 1960s, somebody's been paying taxes on that lot. Somebody's been paying HOA fees if there's an HOA. So for the past 60 plus years, taxes have been paid, HOA fees have been paid. That does not automatically mean that that's a buildable parcel. And so this morning, it was not quite an acre, but it was a fairly good-sized piece of property. Most would consider an acre a good-sized piece of property, and we couldn't get a drain field that we're well site on. It was nothing but rock, and then we also have to be a certain distance away from adjacent wells and drain fields. So by the time you take the setbacks into consideration and the fact that the lot was nothing but basically a one big rock, we couldn't do anything with it. So the most important thing when looking at purchasing property is getting it under contract and adding a study period to allow someone like myself to come out and do the soil evaluation or perk test. Sometimes it's referred to as a perk test. Mm-hmm. And that will then go through the process of making sure that a drain field site can be improved for that piece of property. What I like to do is always have the buyer involved in helping me to determine, okay, where do you want to build at? And if it's 20 acres, I have no idea where they want to build it. Where I would build at may be different where somebody else's vision for the property. So it's always good to have input from a buyer as to where would you like to build on the property, and let's see if we can work the well and drain field around that. And then also the number of bedrooms as well. You know, most people are good with a 3 or 4 bedroom, but occasionally someone says, I've got a larger family, or I'm going to build a larger home, I need a 5 or 6 bedroom drain field. And that's all important for me to know as well, so I can kind of provide them guidance. And certainly a 6 bedroom drain field is much larger than a 3 bedroom. So if we're on a half-acre lot, getting a 6 bedroom drain field is probably unlikely just because of the math wouldn't fit in such a small parcel. But having that information up front is necessary for me to come out and evaluate the property. And then always try to take into consideration, if it's a wooded piece of property, where's the house going and how many trees. Maybe we want to remove this section of trees to enhance the view or make the view better. Well, maybe we could put the septic there if it works out. So we're kind of, you know, we're clearing the trees for a purpose, but also for the purpose of the view and installing the septic. So there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. And just a word of caution, there's a lot of consultants out there that will go do the easiest perk site on the property. And then when you come back out and say, well, that's really where I wanted to put my house, they'll come up with some additional fees to move that. So you need to hire a consultant that's going to communicate with you and provide the best guidance for what your vision is for the property and to try to make that happen.
You know, you just mentioned something a moment ago, you just mentioned something a moment ago, which reminds me of something about septic systems. You mentioned how important it is to maintain the system, pump it periodically, get it inspected periodically just to make sure it's functioning properly. But the one mistake I have seen a lot of people make is not maintaining the outside of the system, which means you allow trees to grow up either adjacent to or, God forbid, in the system. How much damage can tree roots do to a drain field if they're left unchecked?
Absolutely. Tree roots, certain type of trees can be detrimental to a system. You know, for example, and actually the regulations require certain types of trees to be a certain distance away from the drain field. And I'll give you an example. Maple trees are notorious for their roots searching out drain fields, and they'll get in the drain field pipe and they'll clog it up completely. You know, my parents about 5 years ago, they were having some sloped toilet issues, and we went out there and restarted the distribution box. And as we were working our way to the drain field, all 3 drain field lines were completely clogged, and there were 2 maple trees about 40 feet away that had just worked their roots up there and completely clogged it. So it's important that if you know where your drain field is, and it's just keep it maintained, keep it mowed. If it's further away, if it's in a wooded setting, just keep an eye on that. There really shouldn't be any trees on top of a drain field. Now, the newer systems, you know, we've got drip systems, which are essentially like a subsurface irrigation system. You can have trees, you can run the drip tubing around some of the larger trees, and then they would plant grass over top of the rest. And it's just a matter of going out there and keeping the grass mowed and maintained, and not letting saplings and smaller trees grow up in there. If you have an older system and it's entirely covered in trees and vegetation, I would recommend having a septic inspection company go out, open up the distribution box, and run a camera inside the drain field lines just to see if there's roots have gotten down in there. But they can be very detrimental to a system. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I have seen numerous times, and I'm sure you've seen it probably hundreds. I had a client who purchased a house down in Culpeper a couple of years ago, and when we requested a septic inspection, got a company out there, and when we arrived, the owner said, "Oh, we're pretty sure the septic tank is over here." It points to a house, to a spot right in front of the house, right underneath the drip line for a large maple tree. I thought, "Oh, this could be a problem." First thing they discovered when the inspector opened the tank up was, first, there was no water in it. Oh, it's not good. And the entire side of the inside was covered in tree roots. So the tree had literally, the roots had, I guess, found some kind of cracks in that tank, grown through it, and literally split the tank in half.
Oh, wow. That's bad.
So the full new septic tank, the distribution box was also damaged. The lines were okay, fortunately, but still a lot of money for that seller.
It is, and a lot of the mindset for homeowners is out of sight, out of mind. And the issue with septic is that it's not a problem until it becomes a problem. And it's usually a very nasty problem that it becomes. And sometimes it could easily back up into your yard or back up into the basement. We had a situation a couple years ago in a Northern Virginia county where the septic alarm kept going off a couple times a day, and the homeowner would just go out there and silence the alarm. And then the next day it would go off and they would silence the alarm. And then one night the alarm went off about 2 a.m. They went out there and shut the breakers off to the pump, and woke up the next morning and the entire yard was flooded with septic effluent. And it was a nice, cool, breezy morning, so the breeze was carrying that wonderful odor into the neighbor's yard, and they were wondering what was going on. And so, again, preventative maintenance is so important, because the last thing anybody wants to have is a septic issue. And it's not out of sight, out of mind, because if that's your mentality when it comes to septic, you're probably going to end up with a major problem at some point.
You should probably stay in town where you have
absolutely
full sewer service.
Like, if you want to deal with septic, don't purchase a house with a septic system. You can buy a house that's got access to public sewer.
What are the common things that a person might see to indicate there might be a problem in a septic problem?
And sure, absolutely, yeah. So internally of the house, a slow flushing toilet, or drains that drain very slowly, that could indicate that there's an issue with the effluent getting outside of the house. Maybe there's a clog, maybe there's roots that are starting to build up in the lines. That could be an issue. Certainly any wet spots at all in the yard. In this time of year, we're in the middle of July, and if you have wet spots in your yard, it's likely it could be a septic issue.
So that liquid has to be coming from somewhere.
It's got to not raining somewhere. If it's not raining and it's in the summertime, really you shouldn't have any saturation over top of your drain field throughout the entire year. Now, if we've had a substantial amount of rain and we've had a lot of snow melt, then we may have some areas where it stays saturated briefly. But for the most part, the area over top of your drain field should just look like the rest of your yard. It shouldn't be wet at all. And that's one of the things to keep an eye on. It's not uncommon for the grass over top of drain field to grow faster or to be greener. That's pretty common because that area is getting water daily, especially this time of year. Unless you have a sprinkler system, your yard is probably pretty much going to be brown, or like it's been the past couple months. You walk on your grass and it's crunched, right? And so, over top of your septic, your drain field, it's probably greener, a little bit greener than most. That's normal. What's not normal is saturation, wet areas. If you're starting to get some strong odors, some septic odors when you step outside the house, that may be also an issue of some settling of the sewer line, or the septic tank needs to be pumped. Certainly if you see stuff coming out of your septic tank, that's an issue. You call a septic pump out company immediately. But those are some of the things to look for.
So it is normal that some of the wastewater that goes into this line evaporates upwards as opposed to all of it draining downwards. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the current mentality, really starting in 2000, is for newer installation of systems to be closer to the surface. And that way they get not only infiltration into the soil, but also evaporation kind of from the sun. Older systems, the mindset was the deeper the better. So most systems prior to 2000 were installed 2 to 3 feet deep. And kind of the current mentality is shallower is a little bit better to get both infiltration and evaporation.
I mean, as a soil evaluator, how do you determine whether or not a site is suitable for a conventional type system, gravity fed, no mechanics, no electronics, the necessary minimal maintenance system, versus one of the more, one of the alternative systems that may require heavier maintenance as well as higher cost?
Sure. It all comes down to the soil and the available area. The available area, we have to have a certain amount of area for drain field. And let's just say it's 100 foot by 100 foot, so 10,000 square feet, just to give us some general numbers. That area has to be a certain distance away from any existing water wells, springs, utility lines, rock outcrops. So once we identify the available area, then we do the soil evaluation. We dig test pits to document the type of soil that we have. And the regulations require at least 3 feet of good soil for a conventional type system. And that's really hard to find anymore. Most new systems, new evaluations that we do are alternative because it's hard to find 3 feet of good soil. Most of the good soil is either still being farmed or it's already been developed. But we need 3 feet minimum of good soil to propose a conventional type of system. Though whether it's gravity or pump is simply based on the location compared to where the house is. So if we have a proposed house site, if the drain field's down gradient of that and we have 3 feet minimum of good soil, we can get a gravity-fed conventional system.
Till the water runs downhill.
Water runs downhill, and that's the cheapest of the options. If we don't have 3 feet of good soil, as the soil gets worse, we have alternative options. So, for example, for any type of system, we really need a minimum of 6 to 12 inches for any type of alternative system. And so the worse our soil is, the more expensive our septic systems are. So the better the soil, we can do a conventional system. That's the cheapest option. And as the soil gets worse, we have to provide treatment. Our drain fields gets a little bit more advanced with more components, and the cost goes up. So it's all based on the soil and the available area. It's my job to evaluate and interpret what's there and what the regulations comply with, and that's what we go with.
I've seen you at work, and you're out there with literally a manual and comparing the soil types that you see with, I'm not even sure what manual it is you're utilizing, but
we're looking at the soil, the texture, the structure, the color, all of those different properties of the soil is going to tell us how well water is going to infiltrate, how well it's going to move down through the soil profile. That's the goal, is to properly and effectively get rid of the wastewater. We're putting some nasty stuff into the ground, so we want to make sure that the soil has properties to filter that wastewater so it doesn't pollute the groundwater or doesn't pollute a nearby stream. And if we don't have enough good soil to do that, then we have to do an alternative system, which the purpose of an alternative system is to treat that wastewater before it goes into the soil. So we're putting clean water, essentially we're putting clean water into the ground at that point, but it's all based on the soil.
Well, Stephen, thank you for being with us this morning. We really appreciate the information. We're going to put your name and Greenway's contact information at the bottom of the screen, so if people do have needs in this area, they'll know how to get in touch with you. And if you have any any needs in the area of real estate, call us here at Turning Leaf Realty Group, and we'd be love to help you.